Clause 612 in ISO 14001:2015 might sound like just another clause, but don't be fooled. This one underpins the entire environmental management system. It determines what you monitor, measure, and ultimately what you improve. This week, we're diving into Get Clause 6.12 Environmental Aspects Right, or Nothing Else Works. Exploring how identifying significant environmental aspects shapes everything else in your EMS, from planning and operations to evaluation and improvement. Welcome to Lead the Standard. Hello, welcome. I am Kelly Taylor. Glad to see you joining Jackie and I again this week for our usual conversation. This week we are going to build on a message that Jackie has been delivering in training for years, and now we're bringing it to all of you, given our last couple of weeks' conversation around changes to ISO standards. So we're going to continue on with that theme a little bit. As always, if you'd like to explore the topic further, you can find the newsletter that expired today's episode in the show notes. The amendment to the standard, links to that will be there as well. But before we get into any of that stuff, hi, Jackie.
Hello, I am here.
You are here. I feel like I talk a lot before I bring you in. I might need to shuffle that around a bit.
No, I've just got to sit here and smile nicely.
And hope that I don't say anything too inappropriate or crazy. As well.
Always.
Always. I think today I will disclose we have been a little bit cheeky, silly beforehand, so we may or may not break into some crazy giggles along the way today.
Oh, because it's such a funny topic.
Oh, the puns are ready. I am so good for puns today. I'm excited. But let's get into it, because this one I think is going to be like last week. We're going to have to really kind of restrain ourselves to keep to time. I have a stopwatch going ready this time. But Jackie, you've said before that if you get clause 612 wrong, the whole system starts to wobble. So what made you bring this clause to the centre of this month's, besides the obvious, theme of environment here at ATO?
Well, I guess, yeah, as you said, I've been forced to write about environment this month.
Well, I'm going to blame ISO this time, not me. ISO and Hazel, the marketing.
That's right, our marketing team. So we have a theme, yeah. And so April, is it April? Yes.
Yep. Isn't that terrible?
Is environment, which is great, because then, I know what to focus on. And as you said before, as I was mapping out, these few environmentally themed newsletters, etc., of course this one was top of mind, because I'm basing it on my experience. So, and you even said it in the intro, because you've heard me talk about it before, is that clause 6.1.2 environmental aspects, well, it's something I learned early on, it's the core. And I've only ever said it like that. So it's really good to have been given the opportunity to map it out. And that's where I came up with that model. I can't even remember what I called it. It's like, an environmental aspect integration model, because then rather than me just saying it, I could visualize it and go, okay, well, where is the other clauses, the other links to aspects? Why am I saying this, and where are they? So I was able to map that out visually, and you'll see that visual possibly up now.
Definitely in the notes.
Post-production, it should be up now. But it's also in the newsletter, the original newsletter as well. I did get it up ready for here, because I do like visuals myself. So
yeah, what I've found then is, and I think this is probably why you couldn't remember what you called it, this time you haven't been really creative with the name, but you've been very clear with what that looks like. And I don't want to get into it too much now, but I've been working a bit with Melissa, our content designer, and this is part of the conversation that we had earlier in the week and around the integration and the aspects and those sorts of things. So, and the challenge with mapping that, so which is why I'm really to talk this one through really and get a bit more of an idea of that. So let's be conscious of time today and jump on in.
So I suppose I know you always want a short answer, so I'll give you that and then I'll feed into the first area that I think is integrated to clause 6.1.2. So as you sort of hinted at, this clause, it's not just another clause and you tick it off and you're done. It's sort of, as I said, it's the launch point. Maybe I should have called it something like that, a launch. But anyway, it's the launch point for your entire EMS. So once you identify your significant environmental aspects, so I want to highlight that word significant. Yes, you're going to identify all of your environmental aspects, but then you'll do a risk rating to identify your significant. Those significant aspects, they ripple through other parts of the standard, and you'll see it that it's specifically referenced. So that's why that environmental aspect integration model. So the key word there is integration, because that's sort of what I had in my head. It's like, okay, we've identified these significant environmental aspects. Where do they integrate into our EMS? So I identified 5, and they were planning, support, operations, performance evaluation, and improvement. Sounds pretty standard for ISO standard, but I'll explain them all in a little bit more detail. So as Kelly said, I think if you get this right and you build your system, then your system is relevant, it'll be strategic, and it's really built on what truly matters, because you've identified those significant environmental aspects correctly in the first place. Of course, it's going to be a cyclical process, and depending on changes in what your activities, products, and services, you'll always loop back. But as long as you've got that continual cycle, it will mean that your EMS, your environmental management system, is actually built on the truth, what matters. Okay, so I'll just start off with the first category and explain it bit by bit, because there are 5 of them that we need to get through. So the first category, linked to clause 6.1.2, environmental aspects, and this environmental aspect integration model is planning. That makes sense. So in this planning category, you can put clause 6.1.2, which is the key one, of course. You can put 6.1.4 and 6.1.5, which are your risks and opportunities and planning actions. And of course, that feeds into clause 6.2, your objectives and planning to achieve them. Okay, so this is where you initially identify your significant aspects. As I said before, the key word here is significant. You will identify all aspects, but then you do a risk rating, and those significant ones are what carry through, because obviously they're high risk. Okay, so we've determined the high risk, significant aspects. Then, of course, the next step is determining the risks and opportunities associated with them. So that's why I picked clause 6.1.4, 6.1.5. And then it's also where we take it to the next level with clause 6.2, our environmental objectives, because if we've identified these significant aspects, well, we want to set some objectives around that so that we're managing them. So that's where that risks and opportunities and objectives come into play, because they're about managing or mitigating and I suppose planning the actions to deal with what you've identified. So these significant aspects then drive the entire EMS from this point. So getting it right at this planning stage is really important. But as I said, you can loop back around as things change, but this is really important to understand your significant aspects, set some actions in place within your risks and opportunities and your environmental objectives to manage them, to corral them. Does that make sense?
It does. But before we continue on, could you just clarify for our listeners the clauses and how you've come to this today? Have you based this on the 2015 revision or the draft amendment? I just want to clarify that at this point.
2015. Yeah.
Excellent. And the reason that we have done that is because it is a draft amendment at this stage. So if you are listening to this and ISO has been updated, come and see us. We will, if we haven't got, have a fantastic a reference point comparing before and afters with that amendment. So I did want to start here with confirming that, Jackie.
And honestly, nothing will change though. I don't want people to think, they're listening to something that's outdated. It's not. Nothing will change. This is still significant. So, as we discussed the changes in last week's podcast and that newsletter,
shuffling and some word replacements.
Yeah, it's just re-emphasizing some stuff. Okay, around climate or climate change, and that will come up in your aspects anyway. So, and it will flow through exactly the same. Okay.
Excellent.
So that's the first part. The second category that I linked to this integration model and to that clause 612 environmental aspects was around support. So as we all know, support is in clause 7. So building awareness and providing these resources that we have determined are necessary to support us to implement what we decided in our planning. Okay, so you can see we're moving along. We've done our planning in the previous integration part, and now it's, well, what do we need to support it? And I found this obviously 7.2 competence, awareness, which is 7.3, and communication, which is 7.4. So this is building that support structure to help us to implement what we identified in our planning, in our significant aspects, our risks and opportunities, and our objectives, and then planning what to do. So this part, this support part, it ensures that everyone involved understands the significant aspects relevant to their role. So you can see it's already stepping through. Okay. Yeah. Already, and we're only on the second link or integration. You can see, we've identified our significant stuff that influences our objectives and our risks and opportunities. And now we're going to share this with our people, our resources, where it's relevant to their role, because it's important. It's not just something that sits on a piece of paper or a folder up on the shelf. It carries all the way through. So this is also where you put in place that competence, awareness, and communication within your resources. So obviously, if there's specific significant environmental aspects relevant to somebody's role or multiple people's roles, well, then there needs to be an element of competence and understanding, which is done through communication. So you can see it's filtering through. We need our resources to be on top of this because they're the ones that are going to be implementing, which is coming up. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And the reason I didn't get into too much answering of your question at the planning stage was because I was waiting for this part. I know we've got operations and everything coming, so I'm just going to hold them. But there were 2 words that I was waiting for you to say to get to this point, and they were significant. And I don't know if you've said significant enough today. So let's go back to your word.
I think it's been significant.
Yeah, a significant impact. But significance and relevance. I was wanting that relevant word to come up.
Did I say relevant? Oh, I did.
Because
relevant
to the role for the relevant people in the relevant roles.
Correct.
And this is where it aligned. So obviously you'll have top management and relevant interested parties involved in that planning stage. And then when you've done all of your planning, you've identified those aspects, not all of those aspects are going to be relevant to all of your
Correct.
resources.
Correct.
So that's why I was kind of holding off here, because there are going to, and I suppose it's definitely going to come down to the way that you communicate it, but there are going to be a lot of aspects in general that are identified. As you said, we want to focus on the significant ones, and there are going to be a lot of aspects, significant or not, that are not relevant to your resources. So as part of all of that planning stage, I think you need to be aware of just this next step that's coming, because if you get this part wrong, you're going to end up in kind of a crazy loop and really screw yourself up for the next couple of steps you've got. Because people are going to be telling you that you miss things, and no, we didn't miss that. It's just not relevant to either your role or this project or whatever it is, or we haven't deemed that at this point to be significant. We have identified it, but it's not one of our significant priorities. So again, making sure that as you said, the resources and the support crews that you put into place are focusing on what is significant and is relevant to them and everything you'd mentioned earlier.
And that should come into play into the third category, because in operations, then they're following certain processes and procedures, and the controls, I guess, around the identified aspects will be within those procedures. So they're just doing their job, essentially, if the system is being built.
So they're going to be touching on things somewhere along the way, but they might be the ones that are responsible for the implementation or the management or something at that support step.
No, good point. Okay, so then that leads nicely into that third category that I've linked once again to 612 environmental aspects and this integration model, which of course is operation. And we've been using the word implement as well. So essentially clause 8 is operation, which means, okay, I've done my planning, I've got my resources sorted out, and now what? I've actually got to do it. So so that's where this operation level comes in. So it aligns beautifully, obviously, with the standard, I suppose, structure, but it also makes sense with the integration with these significant aspects that you've identified way back in clause 612. Okay, so in this section of operation, it is about implementing and controlling the processes to manage those significant aspects. Okay, so we cover that in clause 8.1, which is operational planning and control. And it also pops up in 8.2, emergency preparedness and response, because obviously in emergency preparedness and response, it's like, okay, we've identified these potential emergency events, and this is how we are proposing if they do occur, these are our response plans. And of course, within that, there's some testing, etc. Okay, so this is all about your significant aspects now moving into action, essentially. So your operational controls, your procedures, as I mentioned before, Kelly, this is where they're developed and they're implemented to manage those aspects that you identified, which includes the controls, and the controls internally, as well as your outsourced processes. So, contractors don't get out of jail free card. They're workers. And as I mentioned, your emergency preparedness ties in here as well, because of course, if an event does occur, of course, it can lead to environmental impacts. That should have been identified in 612 already. So that's the beauty of 612, is that it's really going to open up your whole EMS as to, well, what do we have to manage and control and what potentially could happen? So let's get prepared for it.
This is one of the things that, again, has fascinated me over the years. That, and I think I said earlier, we were talking about, Melissa and I were talking earlier in the week around some content that we're developing, and trying to map each one of these clauses to each other, and how they, the inputs and the outputs, and how they align and how they don't, to kind of give people a better idea of, it doesn't go clause 6.1, 6.2, and you implement it that way. As you're talking this through again, highlighting, look, 612, you've, how many clauses have we mentioned so far? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're talking about one clause, and we've had impacts across 8 things, and how it is going to drive that. Again, if you're smart about this operation phase is fairly straightforward, and one clause, I won't say it does it all, but it does a lot of it. But again, it lost for words.
Yeah. I still want some sort of tool that you just click, and then all the other ones like light up. That's and as you know, I want to, I've tried building something over the years, but it just gets too complex.
Messy.
Yes, because there are so many links. There has to be a way of doing it. I would think you're the smartest person to figure that out, Kelly.
Yeah, and look, I'm halfway there, but it's not. But it is such a challenge, and I like, again, how this is really simple, but it's for those of us who are visual, it is a bit of a challenge to kind of tie this together.
Yes.
It just, the
Do you want me to continue?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
To forget about what my role is, it's operations. What?
No idea what Kelly's trying to say. I'm guessing you're trying to visualize what I want. Yeah, what I'm seeing. It's like bing, 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 bing. That's what I want to see. Anyway, you'll come up with something. The fourth category linked to, again, 612, environmental aspects. And what I've put in this integration model is, of course, performance evaluation. And we all know that this is around clause 9. Okay, so of course, once we've planned, we figured out our resources and communicated, and then we've implemented, well, we need to check that it's actually working. Okay, because it's all very well in theory. Now we've put it into action. We need to monitor it. Okay, and it's high risk, so let's monitor it. Like, we need to assess the effectiveness of those strategies and actions that we planned or put in place in the operations phase. So the 2 clauses that cover that are 911, which is monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation, and of course, ta-da, my favorite, 9.3. I reckon I should have thrown in 9.2, internal audit, there as well, to be honest. Because then that's checking, like, obviously that feeds up to management review, and that's why I just put management review. But I think 9.2 sits nicely between 911 and 9.3 as a way of assessing as well. So if you're listening, scribble and add 9.2 internal audit in. So, of course, you can't improve what you don't measure. All right. I'm pretty sure, is it Peter Drucker has a quote around that? So we need to measure to understand, well, is this working? What can we do better? Always. So clause 911 focuses on that monitoring and evaluating your performance, specifically related to significant aspects, because in that clause it does ask the organisation to identify the areas to monitor, measure, analyse and evaluate. And of course, part of that is based on risk. So the higher risk stuff you should be monitoring. Okay, and that's why I've thrown in, well, that should be your significant aspects. It should follow all the way along. So then 9.3 then pulls it all together for top management, so the leadership, to review. So, at a strategic level, so they're checking if there's the actions are actually tying back to the aspects, and what what has been implemented is actually working, is effective, essentially. So it's that monitoring process. So 9.1 is probably more at the operational level. 9.2, and I know I don't have it in the actual newsletter, but I do think it belongs, could be more at the system level. Okay, and then it all comes together in 9.3 management review. So that focus should on moving forward and improvement, which is a good segue to the fifth and last section that integrates, should be all around those significant aspects, or at least include the significant aspects. Of course, there's other higher level strategic stuff to include, but I'm focusing on significant aspects here.
Yeah, and again, the tie-in, I do agree. 9.2 is really relevant here for, again, looking at the significance. If we were just looking at everything, then yeah, maybe not. But because we are looking at significant things, that they do have the impact not only on the business strategy but the wider community, not just, again, clients and customers. Internal audit and management review are really important. And this, they're always important, but definitely from this point, looking at the significant.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Okay, so the fifth and final one. Yeah, I'm glad you found your words in that one. I'm impressed.
I'm struggling. I need more coffee.
Okay, so the fifth category that I linked to clause 612, environmental aspects. One thing you'll get out of this, you will never forget the clause number for environmental aspects, because I've said it so many times.
Significant
amount of times. So the last sort of category, I called it improvement, but so improvement should be more around that clause 10. So 10.2, which is your non-conformance and corrective action. Okay, so that's that as an offshoot from operation. Okay, so obviously, because that's what we've done. We've done our planning, we've done our support and resources, and then we implemented it, and then we're monitoring it. And now the output from that is, okay, what have we learned? Is what we planned way back in clause 6, is that actually working? Because what did we pick up in that fourth category of performance evaluation? So it all filters through these core areas. So it's a really great example of showing how this, way back in clause 612, it just filters all the way through. And now in these last areas, it's clause 10.2 is the key one. That's where we start going, okay, what are we doing? What's happened? Get to the root cause of it. And it's this is me going, it's a cycle. Remember earlier I said, we don't just plan once. While I've got these 5 things there, we don't just plan once. It's a continual cycle. We always end up back at planning, because at this point in the fifth one of improvement, well, things that we've identified should feed back into planning, because that should feed into our risks and opportunities. It should feed into our objectives. Then that feeds into our resources, and it feeds into implementing our operations. Then we review it, and we're here again. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And lessons learned from ourselves, and again, not necessarily specific to environment here. If you don't go back with that, the going from your planning to your operation without stopping at that support point, and you're looking at your resources in the middle, I feel like that resource section, when we look at the PDCA cycle, there's kind of that gap between the planning and the doing section. And I think this resource kind of fits nicely in there. And I feel that can often be the gap, or the bit that people overlook or they don't prioritize, because you can't do everything else. Like, you can plan all you like and you can implement, but if you don't have that resourcing part,
True.
that cycle is probably going to move through a lot quicker or more frequently. So it
True.
will always be a cycle, but how fast you move through or how frequently you move through is going to come down to those resourcing
Yeah,
areas. And you won't do
absolutely.
that if you don't get to that
Yeah,
last
and well,
improvement
get
stage.
the right resources as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you got the right number, the right type,
correct.
the right people? Just because you
Yeah,
have the right number of people doesn't mean that they're the most competent
yeah. The right
people.
people in the
So,
right seats.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Very good point. Okay, so I'm just going to summarize the
Yeah, let's
key
jump into them. I don't
areas.
know if there's much more to add today.
No, it's pretty well. I was going to say it's pretty straightforward, and it was really just a simplistic, I suppose, points of, well, this is how it works. It really is simplistic if you look at it that way. So,
That's why I haven't had much to add, because it
yay.
is. It's
Okay.
surprising.
Yeah. Okay. So the key points that Kelly and I talked about were planning. So, and of course, just to summarize, obviously, these key points are the areas that I linked clause 612, environmental aspects, and specifically significant ones that were identified. I wanted to, like, the intent of this was to identify, well, why is it important and where does it come up in the rest of the standards? So it comes up, I think we were halfway through and you'd already counted 8, but I think there's probably, a dozen in there where it continues all the way through. So it covers planning. So that's your objectives and your strategies, what you want to achieve. Of course, before that, you've identified your significant aspects. So that's all in clause 6. Then, as Kelly went on about, is the resources, which I called support, because that's where your resources. So it's about awareness, communication, competence, because in this area of support, we then share the significant aspects with our workers relevant to their roles. Okay, so they need to be aware of that. They need to be competent enough to do their jobs with an understanding of that. And then that all comes into place with the third integration, which is around operation. So that's all in clause 8, 8.1, I think I said, operational planning and control, and 8.2, emergency preparedness. So now that middle bit is, we're now doing it. Everything that we planned for with the right people in the right seats, we're going to have a go now and see if it actually makes sense in practice. Okay, we're going to test the theory. And then because we're testing the theory in practice, the fourth integration is around that performance evaluation, where we talked about 911, which is monitoring, measurement. I always forget the evaluation and analysis, or the other way around. We're monitoring stuff, and that's normally at an operational level. We had 9.3 management review as well, but I also said, you know what, I think 9.2 internal audit's also important, because we're evaluating the previous step. Well, have our implementation steps, our action plans through operations, does that theory actually work? Or can we make it better? Which moves us to the final one of improvement, where we've identified those gaps, and now we go full circle and go, yeah, you know what? This didn't quite work, as expected. Let's go back to planning. Okay, set some new objectives, retrain people, make them aware. Let's implement it and then check it again. So you go into that full cycle. Okay. So do you think that's a fair wrap up?
I think it's perfect.
Okay.
Perfect wrap.
Okay. So as always, before I hand it back to you, Kelly, I do like closing with, anyone can follow the standard. Why don't you be the one to lead the standard, please?
On that note, don't forget, check in the show notes. Jackie has a book coming out. We are closer to a date. So that will also be in the show notes as well. Links for that when it's available. Exciting. That is a wrap for another episode of Lead the Standard. I am leaving the room today and going to find where my brain connects to my mouth and make sure that I can say words for the rest of the day.
Although maybe people like it this way.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like I've been watching too many political stories on the news or something and talking gobbledygook. Bad influences. Today we have explored why 612 is the launch point for your entire environmental management system and how the environmental aspect integration model brings this clause to life across all areas of the standard. So Jackie, thank you for walking us through how that one clause can drive such significant system-wide impacts. Thank you for carrying the team today, because I have failed miserably. But I think today was the perfect one for me to not be able to talk. Because
I'm sure you're going to have to carry me at some point if you haven't already.
But I think too, again, my highlight this week was I didn't really need to contribute too much, because the beauty of this week was that you have turned what some people could find this huge, big, we said 8, 10, 12, however many clauses. There's a lot there that can be quite intimidating, and you've really simplified that through this model, and it really was simplistic. There wasn't too much to elaborate or discuss. So that was my highlight this week, was that it was very straightforward. So thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'm glad.
Next week, so am I. Next week, we will be back with another insightful episode. I promise to find words between now and then. ISO 14001 2015 isn't the problem, but how you're pitching it might be. So stay tuned for more details on that one. I cannot wait. Have a bit of a discussion. It's like anything. How you pitch it is how it's taken. Thank you all for listening. As always, please don't forget to subscribe, share this episode, leave us a review, give us your thoughts. Were there anything other clauses that we overlooked and can add back in later? We'd love to hear everyone else's thoughts and ideas on this one too. Until we see you next week, take care and keep leading the standard. Goodbye for now.
Bye.